The increasing number of credible reports that the Trump administration has cruelly and likely illegally deported innocent people to horrific conditions in other countries has gotten so bad that during a recent episode of the Joe Rogan Experience, 3 enlightened centrist Trump-aligned figures, Rogan, Konstantin Kisin, and Francis Foster, the latter 2 of Trigonometry, are publicly condemning the Trump administration for having done so. But before we unpack all that, if you end up liking this video and you want to support the channel, please be sure to hit the like, subscribe, and alert bells before you go. All right, friends, there might be some hope left, maybe, for Joe Rogan and the 2 fellas from Trigonometry who are enlightened centrists but grade Trump on a curve and seem to hold Democrats to higher standards, and they seem to ignore most of the excesses and abuses of the Trump administration. Well, we're finally seeing some pushback, okay, and this happened during a recent episode of the Joe Rogan Experience. We're going to play this clip and unpack it together.
Yeah.
And there's probably still people coming through that are criminals.
Yeah.
You know, but the thing is, like, you got to get scared that people who are not criminals are getting, like, lassoed up and deported and sent to, like, El Salvador prisons. Like, that kind of shit. Because I read some story. Was it Glenn Greenwald?
It was.
Yeah. The gay barber guy?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's scary, man.
Is that true? Is that story accurate?
I don't think we know.
Can you explain the story for people that don't know?
Well, from what I read, I think it was in Time magazine, Jamie, if you can pull it up, and maybe we can get it accurate. But basically, with a bunch of these Agua guys, allegedly they got at least one guy who wasn't a criminal, who was just a gay barber who I think, according to the story, came here legally. He was here legally. That's what they said. Don't know if it's true.
Did he have a green card?
I don't know what the details are. Maybe Jamie can find it.
No criminal record.
From what it said in that story. Now, this is the problem, right? Because the mainstream media has been putting out so much shit that I don't know what to believe anymore, right?
I feel the same way.
And so it's difficult, but it's something that we actually brought up in one of our conversations. We interviewed the guy from the Heritage Foundation. We brought this up because I think we talked about this with Doge as well. When you do things quickly and you do things aggressively, that's how you get shit done. But that's also when mistakes get made.
Right.
And I think a human being being plucked out of nowhere and ending up in a country he's never been in a maximum security prison with gang members, seems like a bad thing to happen to me.
It's horrific. It's horrific.
I don't think that's...
So this is what I mean, okay? It's good that they're saying this. I would still quibble with some of the language, like it seems like it's a mistake. No, I mean, again, there seems to be some tepidity, right? So their tepidness in criticizing the Trump administration, but at least Joe Rogan is saying it's horrific. And even Kisin at one point says it's scary. Again, I'm just imagining how they would have reacted if it had been under a Democratic administration. They probably wouldn't be so charitable with their language. They'd probably be saying much worse things. But again, this is a positive sign that even Trump-aligned enlightened centrists are on some deep level, they are aware that this is super fucked up, probably illegal, certainly immoral. I would argue an act of evil, an act of abject cruelty that they are doing on purpose. So let's talk about this. Aaron Reichlin-Melnick has pointed out that according to the ACLU, they obtained ICE's Alien Enemies Act Validation Guide, confirming that all it takes to be sent to rot in prison in El Salvador is, number 1, having a tattoo an ICE officer says is a gang tattoo, and 2, displaying logos, symbols, or clothes an ICE officer says are gang signs. He goes on to say that another document filed by the ACLU is an unclassified ICE document showing what it alleges are Tren de Aragua tattoos. The New York Post also published these in 2024. But reverse image search shows these images were stolen from the internet and have nothing to do with TDA. Yikes. So as pertains to this particular story, an ACLU filing sheds light on how Andre, the gay makeup artist sent to rot in a prison in El Salvador, ended up labeled TDA by ICE. Documents filed by ICE shows that the only evidence listed for membership in TDA was a tattoo of a crown with mom below. On initial interview, detainee Hernandez said that he was not a member of any gang. Upon conducting a review of detainee Hernandez's tattoos, it was found that detainee Hernandez has a crown on each of his wrists. The crown has been found to be an identifier for the TDA gang member. Yeah. That's where we are with this. Okay. It's just, I mean, it's so it's just so hard to like. And you know what you say to this? It's an act of extraordinary cruelty by the Trump administration. It doesn't have to be this way. If you exercise due process and due diligence, these things could be avoided. You could avoid sending an innocent person to a brutal El Salvador prison. I say brutal because the prison is known in El Salvador and abroad for its cruelty. It would be bad enough, quite frankly, to send just most people there, right? But to send an innocent person in particular goes beyond just a mistake, just a whoopsie goof, right? The Trump administration is doubling down on this. They haven't admitted their mistake. They haven't acted to get this man out of the El Salvador prison. Like, oh shit, sorry. Oh my God, I am so sorry. Get him out of there immediately. It's not like Trump is on the phone with, is it Bukele, the president of El Salvador, saying, hey, get this guy out of this prison. We made a huge mistake. We need to get him out immediately and bring him back to the United States. This is a widely circulated story and has been for more than a week, and nobody cares, at least not on the right, not in the Trump administration. Glenn Greenwald, a conservative, libertarian-coded free speech guy who, by the way, again, usually just complains ad nauseum about the left, to his credit, he has been complaining about this and trying to draw attention to this since the story broke, about the Trump administration's excesses, about its lack of regard for due process and free speech protections. Not just in this story, but other stories as well. We've been hearing stories about protesters being black-bagged effectively and disappeared. Mahmoud Khalil, for example, a different story, but in the same situation in which, the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, is attempting to deport him out of the country. He was taken from New York, extradited to red state Louisiana, where it was more favorable legal ground, and they're attempting to kick him out of the country. They haven't alleged that he committed a crime. It's just, hey, we can revoke his citizenship. He's an LPR, a legal permanent resident under a green card. We can just revoke his green card and kick him out because we don't like his speech. We're hearing all kinds of these stories. But in this particular case, I mean, as bad as the Khalil situation is, and it's terrible, at least he's still here in the United States. A judge managed to block this in time. It's pending review. Landry, this story didn't break until after he was ejected from the country. It's just, again, you think about this. Think about how bad it has to be for Joe Rogan and Konstantin Kisin and Francis Foster to speak up. Now, will this result in any meaningful departure or breaking from the Trump administration, ideologically speaking? Will they become more critical in their coverage? I don't know. My gut says no, right? But it's bad enough that it offends even their sensibilities. And more people need to be talking about it too. Because again, the instance itself is horrific, as Joe Rogan says. And even if you act in a way to save this man's life, I mean, Jesus, the terror that he has no doubt suffered being abducted from this country wrongfully and sent under these horrific conditions to a different country, to a place notorious for its cruelty, you can't undo that. And again, there's been no effort from the Trump administration to correct this mistake. And all we're getting in return are reports like that of a tattoo that an ICE agent just thinks is a gang identifier. And it turns out that most of these gang identifiers are just a reverse Google search. They just come from Google. It's stunning stuff, guys. It really is. And it's not just this. Like I said, it's multiple instances becoming a pattern of the Trump administration that in their efforts to kick people out, it sure seems like it's an authoritarian crackdown on free speech or just some sort of like attack against tattooed brown people. Like there's no good faith way to interpret this. If you want to deport violent criminals from this country, no problem with that. Or at least those who are here illegally. If you're a violent citizen of the United States, you can't be deported. We can't deport citizens here. But if you are an undocumented migrant, or even a migrant, like a documented migrant, like again, Mahmoud Khalil, Okay. There are some crimes that render you eligible for deportation if you are an LPR, legal permanent resident, or a green card holder. And if Mahmoud Khalil had committed a crime that the government felt it could allege and prove, and they exercise due process and kick him out, fine. If this hairdresser, Andre, if he committed a deportable crime, that would be one thing. There's no evidence that he did. And when the Trump administration has been challenged again and again and again and again and again to prove why they did what they did to him, he had a tattoo that 2 crowns and his mom's name, or it says mom. That's the basis by which you kick this innocent man out of the country? Like, it really is stunning. And I just don't know what the recourse is, because the Trump administration is claiming absolute extraordinary powers over this particular issue. And to be fair, typically speaking, the president has been deferred to extraordinarily on matters of immigration, right? And so Trump is flexing on this. And there's been a back and forth, obviously, with the courts. We've been covering that. But he's banking that the United States Supreme Court will tolerate this shit and approve of his ability to make shit like this happen. Can we count on them to check him? I don't know. I'm a cynic. I don't have a lot of faith in the United States Supreme Court. But again, I just want to say it's bad enough. It's bad enough that even Joe Rogan is calling it out. In the meantime, let me know what you think in the comments.